The film opens with a van pulling up beside police detective Zwick's car. Zwick hands Miller Graham and his friend Kevin a drawing of a safe, assuring them he'll handle the police radio. Kevin hesitates, but Miller proceeds with the job. They cut through a wall and extract the safe. Upon cracking it open, they find bundles of cash. However, while removing the money, they notice a motion sensor, triggering an alert to every nearby police car, including Zwick's. Kevin expresses concern about his sister April, but Miller rushes him out with a bag of money. Zwick, aiming to avoid being exposed, shoots his own car door with a revolver and then fatally shoots Kevin as soon as he steps outside. When Miller appears, other police officers are already at the scene. Zwick arrests Miller, whispering a fabricated story. Kevin was armed and shot at him, forcing Zwick to kill him in self-defense. Zwick also warns Miller to comply, reminding him of his wife and baby's safety. 10 years later, Miller is released on parole and is met by his friend Frank, who has done everything possible to help him. Frank hires Miller as a locksmith, provides him with an old phone, some money, and returns his truck. He also informs Miller that he has kept in touch with Beth, Miller's ex-wife, and their daughter Lindsay. That evening, Miller calls Beth to arrange a lunch with her and Lindsay. The following day, when they meet, Miller struggles to converse with Lindsay. While she orders pie, Miller apologizes for his past mistakes and the difficulties they have caused his family. The next morning, Frank wakes Miller with news of a job. Miller installs a digital lock on a property owned by Garrett, a landlord who manages several rentals. Garrett mentions he heard about Miller's skills from someone in their circle, and Miller is surprised to learn that the person who informed Garrett was April, Kevin's sister. Garrett reveals that April rents one of his properties and he's been trying to help her out. Back at Frank's, Miller encounters April waiting outside for him. She explains she's in desperate need of money and asks for Miller's help, which involves an illegal job. Miller, determined to stay on the straight path after prison, refuses, angering April, who storms off. Later, Miller is stopped by two cops, and Zwick appears, forcing Miller out of his car. Zwick, now a lieutenant on the verge of retirement, reminds Miller that his arrest and Kevin's death paved the way for his promotion. Zwick then threatens Miller, warning him to keep quiet about his involvement in the crime. Zwick's henchmen, Detectives Perez and Jones, search Miller's car, find his locksmith tools, and beat him before bringing him to the station. Fortunately, the police chief is honest and releases Miller, explaining that he can't use the tools without certification. Afterward, Miller asks Frank for a basic handyman job, even if it means mopping floors, so he can stay close to Lindsay. Meanwhile, Zwick is celebrated by his colleagues during his retirement ceremony. He invites Beth into his office, offering her the vacant position in Vice, which she eventually accepts. She later calls Miller, asking him to watch Lindsay while she attends Zwick's retirement party. Miller happily agrees, spending the day with Lindsay, teaching her how to pick locks before dropping her off with her mother. Beth tells Miller she's taking the Vice job because she still doesn't know the full truth about the night of his arrest. As they part ways, Zwick appears and slyly comments that Beth will need his detectives in Vice's dangerous operations. Back at the workshop, April confronts Miller again, explaining she needs money to escape Garrett, who uses his real estate business to kidnap and extort people. April blames Miller for Kevin's death, which she believes is the root of her current problems. She insists he owes her help. April then reveals that Garrett hosts high-stakes poker games and large sums of money are kept in his office. She demands Miller break in, steal the money, and leave it at Frank's. Reluctantly, Miller agrees. Meanwhile, Beth uncovers information about prostitution cases declining over the last 3 years, all linked to properties owned by Garrett. Miller and April scout the location for the poker game, discovering that Zwick, along with Perez and Jones, handles security. That night, Miller sneaks into Garrett's house wearing a ski mask, unlocking all the doors, but needs April's help to distract Zwick. She breaks a glass, allowing Miller to slip past unnoticed. He cracks the safe and stuffs a bag with cash, but Zwick enters. A fight ensues, and Miller overpowers him before escaping with Zwick's pistol. As the other cops chase him, Miller uses April as a shield and flees. Unfortunately, Zwick finds Miller's toolbox in Garrett's office, linking him to the scene. Miller stashes the money at the workshop and repeatedly tries to contact April, but receives no response.
The next morning, Miller enters April's house, finding it ransacked. Meanwhile, at Beth's, Lindsay is casually unlocking her mother's handcuffs when Tanya, Beth's acquaintance, arrives. Tanya reveals that she and April are forced to work in casinos where Garrett beats April regularly. She mentions there was a break-in at April's house the previous night, and now April is missing. Tanya also hands Beth a pen drive containing incriminating evidence against Zwick, Perez, Jones, and Garrett. Back at the workshop, Frank discovers the hidden cash and demands answers from Miller. Miller explains that he felt responsible for helping April, who is now missing. Frank urges him to come clean to Beth, but Miller asks Frank to hold on to the money for a day while he looks for April. Later, Beth confronts Miller, asking if he's seen April since his release. Miller denies it. Beth advises him to stay out of the case as it's dangerous and could land him in deep trouble. At the station, Beth submits an envelope to Chief Stern, raising suspicion about Perez. Stern agrees to involve the state police, but Perez notices where the envelope is stored. That night, Miller returns to Garrett's house and interrogates him, holding his head underwater until Garrett admits that Zwick has taken April. Meanwhile, Perez breaks into Stern's office and listens to the incriminating files. As Miller leaves, April signals Zwick to enter, revealing they were working together all along. Zwick kills Garrett and plants Miller's toolbox to frame him for the murder. Miller returns to the workshop, where Frank pleads with him to tell Beth everything. Just then, Beth arrives with Lindsay. As the child sings "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" with Uncle Frank, Miller finally confesses to Beth. She leaves with the stolen money to hand it over to Chief Stern, leaving Lindsay in Miller and Frank's care. Zwick and April drive to a motel, where Perez updates Zwick on the evidence that could ruin them. Panicked, Zwick orders Perez to kill whoever is at the workshop and bring back the money. Meanwhile, at the workshop, Miller receives a call from April. As he speaks to her, he's shot in the leg by someone outside. Frank hides Lindsay, and a shootout ensues. Miller exchanges fire with Jones until Frank kills him with a shotgun. But Perez sneaks in, kills Frank, and kidnaps Lindsay, threatening to harm her if Beth doesn't return the money. Beth rushes back after hearing about the shootout, but by the time she arrives, Lindsay is gone. At the motel, Perez brings Lindsay to Zwick. April protests, using the child as leverage, but Lindsay is handcuffed to a table. April, frustrated, texts Miller the location of the motel before leaving. As Beth goes after their daughter, Miller arrives at the motel, and Zwick taunts him. Meanwhile, Lindsay, remembering the lockpicking skills her father taught her, escapes her handcuffs just as Beth arrives and kills Perez. The mother-daughter duo heads to rescue Miller, who is in a dire situation. Zwick reveals to Miller that April planned everything, wanting revenge for her brother's death. Zwick prepares to shoot Miller, but April intervenes, shooting Zwick in the chest. She confronts him, saying she always knew Kevin would never point a gun at anyone. She finishes him off with a shot to the head. April then turns her attention to Miller, blaming him for her brother's death and preparing to kill him. However, Beth arrives just in time, thanking April for helping them find Lindsay. Miller begs for forgiveness, and April, breaking down, surrenders to the authorities. Sometime later, Miller has taken on 2 jobs, working hard to build a college fund for Lindsay. Beth has been promoted to lieutenant. Together, they attend Lindsay's piano recital, where she initially falters but soon plays "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" as a tribute to Uncle Frank. Tears stream down her face as she transitions into a practiced symphony, and the audience, including her proud parents, applauds her performance.
Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more movie recaps.